Each year, the sea level rises,
setting off irreversible chain reactions beyond human control.
House on fire.
I have the pleasure of introducing Susan Glickman, the Vice President of Policy and Partnerships at the CLEO Institute. She is a powerhouse with over 20 years of working in climate policy and energy policy, including but not limited to working with the Center for Climate Integrity, the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, the Trust for America's Health, and numerous others. She is also the Vice President of the Board of SELF, or the Solar and Energy Loan Fund. Susan is you've had such a long time working in climate policy, over 20 years. And I'm gonna have to pull out this list because it's quite a mouthful to go through. So Susan was the Florida Director of Southern Alliance for Clean Energy and the consultant to numerous national and state organizations, from the National Resources Defense Council, the Climate Group, Our Children's Trust, the Center for Climate Integrity, the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, the National Prostate Cancer Coalition, and the Trust for America's Health. Well, crazy. Susan is also the Vice President of the Board of SELF, the Solar and Energy Loan Fund. SELF was the lead applicant for Florida's successful Solar for All grant, which is $156 million for solar for low-income families. And we're not done. And she's also on the Advisory Council for the Invading Sea, an editorial collaborative of Florida's news and editorial outlets. We love the Invading Sea here at CLEO. Just wanted to put that out there. Susan, you've had such a wonderful 20-year span of amazing work behind your belt. So it is a pleasure to have you on. You're so impressive. And before we continue, I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. So welcome. If I miss anything, please let me know. And I kind of want to get an idea of what brought you to start working on climate and energy issues.
Sure, Danya, it's great to meet you in person. I feel like I know you already. And what a treat it is to work with the CLEO Institute. So as you pointed out, I've been working on climate and energy issues actually for 24 years now.
I'm about to turn 24 on Friday, so
there you go.
That's crazy.
And it's an interesting evolution, this issue. And as you've pointed out, I've worked on a lot of what I call public interest issues. I'm a public interest advocate. But when it comes to climate and energy, it's particularly unique because it's something where the individual can take action, but it really requires a global response to it. And so many of the other issues that I have worked for over time, don't have that element of the technology advancements and the opportunity to make money on it, right? There's an enormous opportunity in the clean energy economy, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. So it's a kind of a wholly unique issue. But what brought me to work on climate change, it is the existential threat to us, particularly in low-lying states like Florida, and on a whole lot of elements of this issue. So it's just the most important issue of our time, and so that is how I feel, just as a person, that's my responsibility.
I would agree.
Here we are.
And here we are on a climate based informational podcast. So, I mean, we're in the right place.
Yep.
So I just wanted to say, I know you just came here from somewhere. I'm not going to divulge where right now, but I hope you had a safe trip here. That it was at least pleasant, because I know sitting somewhere for 4 hours or more is not necessarily the most fun thing to do. But now I will divulge. You're from Tampa. And for those that aren't aware, in 2024, Tampa and the Florida West Coast was hit by not one, but two very strong hurricanes in about a week span. So we were hit by Hurricanes Helene and Hurricane Milton. And since you're from Tampa, I'd like to give a little pause and allow you to talk about what your experience was with those two hurricanes and how the response has been since that point.
Yeah, it's really something to go from talking about these extreme weather events for so many years. I held a press conference up in the state capitol in Tallahassee at the press center in 2004 because we'd had a really crazy
hurricane season
that year. I was working on campaigns And I had to cancel a particular event 4 different times because we kept having these storms. And this really relates to, your earlier question about why do you work on climate change? And we mentioned that I work on tobacco policy, and I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the similarities in the tobacco industry and with what we have with the fossil fuel industry. But our allies at the American Lung Association had a slogan, and it is very apt here because when you can't breathe, nothing else matters. And that's how I see, the climate crisis. And even what I've just gone through and my husband and others. My own sister's home was flattened in Hurricane Ian, and that was 2021.
That wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, that's right. And it was frightening. I actually didn't know where they were. And because of the storm surge and an understanding that I have of what it means with sea rise, and then with the increasing hurricane intensity because our oceans are warmer. The Gulf of Mexico is like a nice hot bath, and that might work sometimes, but it's what's supercharging these storms. So we saw that in 2021. So as it happened, I was up in New York City for Climate Week. I was with CLEO's founder, Caroline Lewis.
We love Caroline.
Yes. And Yoka, our executive director.
We love Yoka.
And I'm watching Hurricane Helene coming. And so
that must have been horrifying.
No, it was absolutely terrifying, like watching a stalker from afar, And
I laugh, but it's not funny.
Yeah, but it is how it feels. It's a very eerie feeling, and we have a fair idea of where a hurricane's going. And so I was born in Tampa, but I live in a little beach community about 30 miles due west of the Tampa airport. We live in a beach cottage that was built in 1940 by one of the Tampa cigar families, Cuesta Ray Cigars, if you know anything about cigars.
I know nothing about cigars, but this is just hearing that. It's kind of like that house was meant for you with the work that you've done.
Very, very quaint place. And so we're across the street from the Gulf of Mexico at 11 feet, and this home had never flooded in 84 years.
That's insane.
Yes. And we ended up with storm surge in our home. In fact, we can't even be in it now. And so
it's been a few months.
Yeah, that's right. We're a couple months out from that. So, we're very fortunate because we have family and friends around, and we were able to stay with my best friend's mother. And so we had places to go. But for a lot of people, they just don't have that. They don't have the resources or just the backup to even have a place to stay. So it's really, really challenging, and it is heart-wrenching to just sort of watch a lot of your possessions that you've lovingly collected over many, many years. And it's just frustrating to watch. And for someone like myself who's been raising the alarm bells about this issue. That's right. And for people and politicians to act like, we don't know what's causing this, I mean, it's extremely frustrating. And I think that's one of the main points that I want to make about the whole climate change conundrum is that we've known about this for a very long time.
Absolutely.
So I'm proud to and fortunate to have gone to the University of Texas at Austin. That's where I got my undergraduate degree. And another famous Texan in 1965, President Lyndon Baines Johnson, in 1965, 3 weeks after his inauguration, said this generation is altering the composition of the Earth's atmosphere by burning fossil fuels.
That's so that we have so much history involved in the fight against climate change, and like you said, the politicians are not taking it seriously, and that's really disheartening.
But in anybody's book, when the President of the United States says something, it means something. It's known. Yeah. That's right. So for people who want to, and the fossil fuel industry, very much like the tobacco industry, right? They have their playbook, which is just to deny. They denied the connection between smoking cigarettes and cancer, just like the fossil fuel industry has denied what it is to burn fossil fuels, and that they're forming a basically heat-trapping blanket and warming the planet, causing all kinds of impacts. So there's some real similarities there. I think it's probably one of the reasons why, I take on these intractable problems because of that, to have these industries just for purposes of making money,
Yes.
Right? So like working with the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, like CLEO, I worked with a lot of young people, students working against tobacco. And it's just very disheartening to see the fossil fuel industry putting chemicals in cigarettes for the sole purpose of addicting people. Right?
The tobacco industry.
Yeah, that's what they do to hundreds of, of ammonia and benzene and arsenic, right, to gets in your lungs and so forth. So to watch an industry do that and essentially, make people, dependent, to have cancer. I've never been a cigarette smoker, but I understand it's like trying to get off heroin, very, very addictive products.
My
right?
dad was a cigarette smoker all his life, and he had a heart attack, I want to say, like back in 2019, which had him stop finally. But I think, was smoking since he was a teenager, like born in the 60s. So
Sure.
I understand like the difficulty of coming off of something that has you in like a chokehold for so long. And then kind of like the parallel of, it doesn't really do anything to you. And then the fossil fuel industry show being like, hey, do some research. What does this cause? And then, oops, it's going to cause climate change. Shh, here's some money to cover it up. Like, that's all sad. It's really depressing.
It's unbelievable that
Yeah.
we would alter the climate of the planet so some relative small handful of people can make money.
Absolutely.
I don't understand that. I don't, at an emotional level, comprehend how someone could do that. But that's what we're seeing. We're seeing, the industries that, make these products that are harmful, impacting international global climate talks. Even here in the state of Florida, last legislative session, they've made it easier to cite gas infrastructure. We already are 75 to 80+% reliant on gas. They would have you call it natural gas. It's
not natural.
Yeah, and it's methane, and it's very, very, potent greenhouse gas. In Florida, 75% of the state is covered by investor-owned utilities like Florida Power and Light, Duke Energy, Tampa Electric, and about 15% are what we call munis.
Municipal.
Municipal, that's right. So
Tallahassee is covered under a municipal energy. Yeah.
You got it. Jacksonville, Orlando, Lakeland, and so forth. So right now, the Jacksonville utility has a gas plant that they're planning to build, 571 megawatts in their 10-year site plan. So that's the kind of thing that CLEO works on. We work on trying to explain to our policy and decision makers how there's a better alternative, how we can meet people's energy need much better, much less expensively, while we protect our natural environment with energy efficiency and solar and and we'll delve into this a little more, but the cost of these technologies have come way down, and then on the alternative, the cost for fossil fuels
has
is
gone up, and it
more
continues to go
expensive.
up.
And that's before we count the impacts of it.
Absolutely.
And what the costs really are.
So moving forward a little bit, we've discussed how the science has continuously shown over the years that fossil fuels and are fueling climate change, for lack of a better word. What is your take on the current state of climate science with your 20 plus years of tenure in this work?
F. Scott Fitzgerald has a sort of famous quote, which is, the sign of first-rate intelligence is when you can hold two opposing ideas in your mind at the same time and still function. So that's me. So right today, we are at 429 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. And, we've already talked about my longevity working on this issue. So for many years, people would come to you and say, I don't believe in global warming, or I don't believe in climate change.
Or I don't believe in sea level rise. They've been saying Miami's going to be underwater since the 80s or 90s. We still are here.
Yeah. Well, this is science, and it's a measurement.
Correct.
And there are things you believe in. You believe in, Santa Claus, the virgin birth, whatever tenet of
The
faith
tooth fairy.
you believe in. Well, there are many people of faith who have very strong tenets, but that's
Absolutely.
faith, and that's a faith tradition. A climate change is parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, and it is a measurement. It is like your height and it is like your weight. And you might not like one of those measurements, but it just is.
You cry and scream
Yeah.
all you want. You can't really change it until you actually change it.
Yeah, exactly. So, the vast majority of scientists, in fact, there is not a single peer-reviewed scientific piece of research that flies in the fundamental face of the idea that human activity, by burning these fossil fuels for transportation and for electricity, are warming the planet. And it's just that simple. So, we're really kind of past debating science, but over these many years, I mean, it was 2007 with the first, the United Nations IPCC report,
Yes.
where they went to a level that they term unequivocal. So it's unequivocal that we are, seeing these changes. So had we started,
Back in 2007,
Yeah,
we'd be
exactly.
making massive strides.
yeah, we would have gone way further. And even then,
Yes.
so this is the other part of the quote about being sort of, utterly hopeless and utterly optimistic all at the same time. Truly, we have 95% of the solutions that we need to transition to a clean energy economy. We still need innovation in shipping and aviation, but by and large, between energy efficiency, wind energy, water energy, solar, and battery storage, I mean, we really have it. It's a matter of scaling it up, and
The will to scale it up also.
Oh, the will is what
stopping us.
It's what's been stopping us because we have these technologies, and it's really tragic that the fossil fuel industry has taken sort of the attitude first to deny, and then to put out doubt, and
then to
now
keep
now
growing
it's
it.
delay. And now it's delay. It's some arguing that we need to develop this technology or that. And before we, wrap up, I'll mention, there are some pitfalls because
Yeah.
they're sort of putting out some technologies that don't really do what they say they're going to do, and they can be a big distraction. And we can ill afford that.
And and just to also speak on the fact that you mentioned, like in 2007, the IPCC put out that report. Like, we're still having these conversations now in 2024, and the most recent COP in Azerbaijan has been really sad to kind of like look at how things progressed over there. And by progressed, I mean barely progressed, barely moved the needle. So the fact that we're still having these conversations it's kind of hard to remain hopeful. But like you said, we have the solution. So there is hope on the horizon. It's just a matter of when, and ideally sooner rather than later. But, technically it's never too late,
Well, we have to move before it's too late.
Correct.
And really, it's sort of striking. You can't help but consider things from your own personal lens. But to be, at this juncture in my career with such a focus on climate change, and at my age, to be thinking that this next 2, 3, 4, 5 years is just going to determine, so much. When I first started working on climate change, we didn't talk too much about adaptation.
Just mitigation.
That's right. We were trying to reduce the problem. Now, I mean, we're just seeing so much advancement with particularly extreme weather and sea level rise, extreme heat, that we have to adapt. We have to adapt to the climate impacts that are already baked in the pipeline. So sea level rise is a great example. We've seen a foot basically since the 50s, 60s, 70s of sea rise, and there is another foot baked in. So you're talking about 2 feet of sea rise. And the question is, because the decisions we make now, today, are going to determine, are we dealing with 2 feet? Are we dealing with 3 feet?
Are we dealing with 5?
Right, that's right. And it's so exponentially more expensive, as the problem grows. That's right. And are we going to be able to do that? And then it's always the most vulnerable are hit first and worst.
The global south, for example, that being a major topic at COP, funding loss and damage for them, helping them like adapt to the climate crisis that they've had the least impacts in, but are the ones being impacted the most. Like, the conversation just keeps reverting to these same points and nothing really keeps moving. So hoping for stronger willpower in the next couple of years is really important. It's just very stressful to think about what that's going to mean for us, particularly also considering what we're going to be facing in the next 4 years in regards to political will in this space.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm constantly stunned that the world is being held hostage
By one.
by
by
this
a couple.
one industry,
Yeah.
right? So you have the cop and, sort of the head person is from Azerbaijan, and they make
last year
their
was-
money
Yeah.
with oil. So, it's
It
really...
wasn't last year Dubai.
And last year was Dubai.
Same situation.
Exactly.
So-
Know, at some point, I think there's just a moral decision to be made here. Are we going to continue to alter the climate of the planet to, to the ends where everyone is impacted by this, and even not always just the most vulnerable. I mean, everyone is impacted.
Everyone's
by
going to be impacted by climate change. Change it's not picking and choosing who, it's just doing.
That's right.
So we've discussed a lot of the fact that climate change discussions have been kind of kept in this kind of feedback loop over the years. And we've addressed some of the reasons why, but what else? Like, why haven't we moved further on action to address climate pollution, say, in the past 10 years?
Well, I'll give you an example. I mentioned a bit ago that in Florida, 75% of the state is covered by investor-owned utilities. So the way utility regulation in Florida works is they get a guaranteed range of a rate of return on their capital expenditure. So for Florida Power and Light, the biggest utility in the state of Florida, it's about 11.5 or 0.8% guaranteed rate of return on capital expenditure. So that means the incentives is on them building. They want to build power plants or new transmission lines, or in fact, just was approved that they're going to pass on another, I think it's $1.4 billion for hurricane costs, right? And all the utilities will do that. So whatever decisions these utilities make, the consumers pay for that no matter what. They just pass the cost on, whether it's for environmental or for hurricane costs or the cost of a power plant or even the cost of power plants that they end up not building. So we had a law passed, it was back in 2006, that allowed utilities to charge in advance for
For the
new
power
nuclear power plants that are very expensive. One of the reasons that the utilities were drawn to nuclear power is because it's expensive. Because the more that's spent, the more that they make. It's like a waiter in a restaurant where you get a tip.
Oh,
right?
I'm also a waiter at a restaurant. I can speak to this. You want to...
Would you like wine or dessert?
We love helping you, but also, do you want the ribeye?
Yeah,
But also, do you want to pair it with this wine?
exactly.
Do you want our top shelf tequila? I'm only offering you the top shelf tequila. I get it, absolutely. You want to raise the cost of the service so that you get a higher
That's
return.
right. The more that's spent, the more that's made.
Absolutely.
And nuclear power is a really good example of that because it's so incredibly expensive. So somewhat recently, a new nuclear power plant came online with Southern Company. So Duke Energy is the largest utility in the country, and Southern is the second largest utility, traditional investor-owned utility. That plant cost about $40 billion.
Oh my gosh.
And it had what's called federal loan guarantees. So these are subsidized by the government. So for anyone who wants to talk about free market and competition, this is anything but. This is where they privatize the profits and they socialize the risk. So if I can take that same $35, $40 billion and get you 2 or 3 times as much energy in something that, oh, by the way, doesn't have that pesky nuclear waste problem.
Absolutely.
Because no country in the world
has figured out how to eliminate the nuclear waste in a way that's sustainable.
Yes, exactly. So in 2006, Jeb Bush was governor of the state of Florida, and the utilities convinced he and the Florida legislature to support a proposal where they could charge in advance to build new nuclear power plants. Guess what? Newsflash, none of them got built.
Yeah, I was about to ask for, I probably haven't heard about it, but are there any in the state of Florida? It doesn't seem like it.
Well, there are two nuclear plants, one at Turkey Point,
Okay.
not too far from where we are,
Okay.
and one up in St. Lucie County on Hutchinson Island.
Okay.
So I won't go into all the details, but there's a lot to talk about there. But in my own community where Duke Energy, they charged people to build new nuclear power plants that never got built. And they also used, and Florida Power and Light did the same thing, that same law to do what they call an uprate, a steam generator upgrade in those plants, where that gave them a small amount of additional generation. But that policy was an incredible disaster. So Duke Energy tried to do that steam generator uprate in-house. They cracked the 22-foot containment vessel in 4 places while they were charging people to build 2 new nuclear reactors in the county to the north. They took about $3 billion from Duke customers for absolutely nothing.
That's
And Florida Power and
horrifying
Light, it is
information.
completely horrifying. And Florida Power and Light story is very similar. The 2 new nuclear reactors they were planning for at Turkey Point have never been built. They took hundreds of millions of dollars from customers for nothing, and they had pretty disastrous results. In fact, the St. Lucie plant has more tube damage than any plant in the country. And when you put in a new steam generator, you're going to cause more steam and more clanking and more tube damage. So, this is about these companies making money.
correct.
And so they're going to try to build the most expensive things. And it's one of the reasons why because that was the question, why haven't we moved forward faster? Because the utilities in Florida have done just about everything they can to discourage people from putting solar on their own homes. More recently, they have started to embrace more solar, what they call utility scale solar, that they own and control. In fact, Florida, the Solar Energy Industries Association has just released a report today, and Florida is the second state, behind Texas. Texas added about twice what we did, but still very significant. So we are adding utility scale solar, very important. We're going to need that, but it really
still remains privatized and still for profit for these companies.
Yeah.
I remember a couple years ago that anti-net metering bill that was going through the legislature, and how that was a very big talking point, how people wanted to have solar on their roofs and benefit from that, and how FPL and other companies like them just didn't want that because that would take away from their profits. And that's truly the interests don't align with the people's interest when it comes to these companies.
That's right. And back in the day, these franchises that were awarded to these companies, made sense when universal service was a challenge. But that's not where we're at anymore. And I'll give you a simple, just sort of understanding of that. Energy efficiency. Not everybody really understands what that is, but helping people be more energy efficient. And sort of the cheapest energy dollar is the dollar that we don't use, right? So around the country, our friends at the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy rank utilities in offering energy efficiency programs to their customers. So out of 53 utilities nationwide, Florida Power and Light is 52 out of 53 in offering energy efficiency to their customers, right?
Don't we love to hear that, folks? That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really, and that is the least expensive way to meet energy need. It has a lot to do with people's resilience and sustainability. So if we do everything we can to capture the cost-effective efficiency, and here's the rub for the utilities, because they get that guaranteed rate of return, they want to build the power plants and the transmission lines. So that's been their model, to have power plants sort of far away from population center, and then you run that energy across transmission lines. In all of these years, I've never gotten someone to give me a really straight answer on
as to why.
Transmission line loss, you're losing all that energy. So if you have a power plant essentially on your roof, right, you're using the energy right there, and the excess is going onto the grid. That is a much more efficient way of operating. But if you listen to the utilities, they tell you that only utility scale solar that they own and control makes sense. We need solar everywhere where it makes sense, right? I mean, you can't have a lot of tree cover, and some roofs are better than others, but One example in my own community is the biggest Anheuser-Busch distributor in the state of Florida. It's called Great Bay Distributor, did a solar array on their cold storage facility. It was about a megawatt and a half of solar there. And that system paid for itself, the savings from the solar system, in 5.15 years. Wow. So the Great Bay Distributor gets to have free electricity for 25 years, right?
Yes.
And that's what we want every family to have. So financing is kind of the secret sauce. I mentioned the Solar and Energy Loan Fund. Also, Self-Help Credit Union is another active entity that provides affordable financing for anybody, but particularly for people who are lower income, who would be paying kind of credit card 27% interest rate kind of thing. So if you can finance that solar and pay that off in 5 years or 6 years, then your family's going to benefit, and we're not going to be creating that climate pollution. That's talk about costing us as a society and individually incredibly expensive. All of the flooding that we're dealing with, and obviously these extreme weather events.
Absolutely. I know we've discussed some of the parallels between big oil and some of the other bigger entities that you've had the pleasure or displeasure of working against in the past couple of years. Are there any other parallels that you can draw on that maybe we haven't touched on so far regarding like misinformation and disinformation that for big oil is regarding the climate crisis and maybe something else?
Well, we started to talk about the tobacco industry, and when I was working on that issue around 2005, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, did not have the authority to regulate tobacco. So that's somewhat similar to where we are
right
now with climate. Yeah, it was in 2017 where the Supreme Court actually ruled in Massachusetts versus EPA that they couldn't regulate these greenhouse gas emissions because they needed Congress to pass a law to do that. So we've been in this struggle, no different than the Food and Drug Administration not having the authority to regulate tobacco. So it almost doesn't make sense to, a normal person hearing about that. Of course, when you have something that is putting us in jeopardy, then we should be able to regulate that. But they're still fighting, power plant rules and methane rules. And there are a lot of concerns that the progress that was made in the last 3 years, 4 years, will be pulled back and repealed. So it is of some concern with some of the laws that have been passed, but the economics of clean energy is what's going to kind of carry the day and the prices. In 2010, solar was 414% higher cost than it is now, related to just what they call the levelized cost of energy. So traditional fossil fuels. So it was 414% higher.
That's
now
a lot for that time.
It's 56% lower. So solar costs 56% less than the equivalent fossil fuel energy solution. So the costs are there. The cost of battery storage in just a couple years has come down like about 90%. So it's just kind of happening, When
The incentives are already like creating themselves, basically.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to roll that back. Same thing with electric vehicles. Not only are they becoming popular, but people see how much less the maintenance and operation. The electric vehicles have so many fewer moving parts, so the mileage isn't as big a deal as it is with an internal combustion engine. And frankly, they're just fun to drive because they have incredible torque. Again, so few moving parts in it. So it's really hard to kind of pull that back in. When I was, a kid, probably junior high school, maybe, we got one of the early microwave ovens. It was in a Amana radar range. It cost $1,000. It was the size of a small apartment. I mean, it was just, and the quality was awful, right?
Yeah.
So what do you walk into, a Target or a Best Buy or whatever, and you can get a sophisticated microwave oven for $200-$300. So that's
You can even
kind of
get a
what's,
cheap one for $60.
or a cheap one for 60. That's right. So that's kind of what's happening. So the technologies are just becoming, the norm. I mean, energy efficiency was always cheaper than building a power plant. So it's the influence of these industries that, are just carrying the day. And I'll give you an example. The parent company for Florida Power and Light is NextEra. And NextEra is the biggest wind and solar producers in the country, right? And they and Duke Energy, so our second largest utility in Florida, they built a pipeline. So they built a pipeline, a gas pipeline that goes from Alabama down to Orlando, and it's really driven a lot of Florida's energy policy. So Florida Power and Light tried to buy the Jacksonville utility. The former CEO of the Jacksonville utility is going to go to prison. He's been sentenced for 4 years for that debacle. And, that would be a customer for this pipeline. They probably already are a customer for the pipeline. If you just keep kind of going down Florida, you can go to Gainesville, where Gainesville has its own regional utility, and Florida Power and Light's been in the market to scoop them up. Governor Ron DeSantis removed the board of the Gainesville Regional Utility in the election in the last month. The city of Gainesville actually, they put on their ballot an initiative to take back the governance from this board that the governor created, so that the city is now governing themselves in their own utility. So the city, the voters in the city of Gainesville really stood up to that. The NextEra was trying to build a gas plant on the campus of the University of Florida.
That's insane.
Very insane, a really bad idea. We got the Rocky Mountain Institute, a former University of Florida student, did an analysis that a renewables-only alternative would be less $115 million before they bought the first drop of gas, right?
Wow.
So it's a small plant on the campus, but again, if you're following that pipeline, it's another customer.
Correct.
And same thing down in Orlando. In 2020, they did an integrated resource plan, and it did not sort of adequately measure the potential for energy efficiency. They ignored a renewable energy lab potential for rooftop solar that they paid for, and locked in 20 more years of gas. Again, customers for that pipeline. So this is how we see energy policy, and whether it's the tobacco industry not wanting the Food and Drug Administration, to regulate tobacco, or it's the same thing with the fossil fuel industry.
And not wanting to regulate fossil fuels.
That's right.
production.
So we've, it's really the fox watching the hen house,
Yeah.
and we need hall monitors, and we need people to hold them accountable. And unfortunately, the policymakers don't do that because of the enormous, financial clout that they have, the campaign contributions to individual campaigns, and also to these sort of leadership races for the president of the Senate or the Speaker of the House. So, it's really all about the money. And I'm here, and one of the things that I just treasure so much about working with the CLEO Institute is people like yourself, younger people who are rising up. Last year, the CLEO and allies brought 250 young people to the state capitol. This year,
We're planning for more.
Yes.
We're planning for more.
Exactly. And that's what, the policymakers need to be held accountable.
Absolutely.
Because they are, setting just a terrible situation for future generations. It's really crushing to me to be working on something for so long. And again, as F. Scott Fitzgerald says, I'm sort of utterly hopeless about the climate pollution and where that's headed, and that we're not moving fast enough. But I'm also eternally optimistic because we do have most of the solutions that we need. We just lack this will. So we have to keep at it. We need more young people to join this fight and stand up for their future.
Absolutely.
And we need everybody to do that.
We need everybody. It feels nowadays like politicians have kind of they've grown too cocky, for lack of better words. Like, they're supposed to serve the people that brought them in, and they continuously keep ignoring the people who are asking for their assistance. So, youth rise up, and allies and everyone else in between, because we need it. We've had a really big discussion just now on like, these are the solutions. This is why we're not getting there. We're not taking these solutions seriously. We're not using them. So a lot of inaction. What would you say are some of like the bigger consequences of inaction? Because there's just a lot of it everywhere.
Well, this is hurting already our economy. And things
Big
like
time.
extreme heat, for
Yeah.
instance. Who's going to be building our interstates and out in agricultural settings where the weather is so incredibly hot? And we've seen that, people are stroking out. And we had a bill last year in the Florida legislature that preempted local governments because Miami-Dade County was pretty close, and CLEO Institute
Passing the heat ordinance.
That's
It would
right.
have helped outdoor workers,
That's
construction workers, agriculture workers. And yeah, I was at the state capitol last year also for Day of Action, where we were trying to help advocate for them passing a statewide heat law to protect outdoor workers, and the preemption passed instead, which was very heartbreaking to say the least, considering all the work that was put in and all the time and just the importance of it. But
Yeah, it's one of the things that the Florida legislature's done a lot is when local governments want to pass a policy like a heat ordinance. When CLEO Institute was part of the fight, but an organization called We Count that works with farm workers primarily in the Homestead area looked pretty close to getting a policy passed in Miami-Dade. So what did? They go up to Tallahassee, where again the money and the relationships,
interests.
yes, are very flow very heavily, and they pass something to preclude local governments from protecting their citizens. It's again, it's pretty stunning. So, but this is costing our economy in terms of work days. I mean, the amount of money that we are spending, and this is globally. You may have seen in the last month they had incredible floods in Spain that were just terrifying looking, and flash floods at the very last minute. So this is happening, these kinds of events everywhere, and that's costing enormous amounts of money. So our gross domestic product is impacted by it. So honestly, the cost of inaction is greater than the cost of action. But what's happening is they're passing those costs on to all of us.
Yeah.
That's what's happening with our insurance prices, right? And
and that's why they're not seeing the consequences or the costs of inaction, because we're the ones seeing the costs of inaction.
That's right. In our rates, and believe me, as someone who's now dealing, with the aftermath of a hurricane, it's incredibly expensive.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, it's not like they hand you the check for your insurance, and you've got to go contractors and
prove that
estimates,
everything-
and it's a really challenging process, to be honest. And then FEMA has what's called a 49% rule. So if you need to rebuild more than 49%, they want you to tear your house down and go up. So who's going to pay for the cost of that?
Absolutely. And there's so much, like, so many situations right now where you kind of feel hopeless, like you said. There's like this intense feeling of they're working against us. But yet, like you've mentioned a couple times now, you continue to have this really optimistic take on what can happen because you have the solutions. And that's really beautiful to kind of think on. You can have this duality, understanding the situation now, having hope for the future. What else gives you hope that we can avoid the worst implications of a warming planet, considering all the pushback that we have from leaders that are supposed to be taking the charge on this?
It's really because of technology. And I think that the younger generations are, more open to new technologies, particularly, something like electric vehicles, where, again, I've been driving fully electric since 2018. It's a much better experience. At one point, I was involved in some focus groups, and one of the takeaways I remember very distinctly was women loathe going to the gas station.
It's awful.
Right.
That's an awful time.
Right. And loathe is a very strong word.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's a strong word. I think it's very apt for what happens at a gas station. If you're a woman,
Yeah, and especially, if you're a mom and you've got young kids and so forth. So there's so many positive things, and women make a lot of the buying decisions.
Absolutely.
Even with automobiles. So I think it's so appealing, and it's wonderful. I have 10.5 kilowatts of solar on my roof. I probably got that around 2017, in that era as well. So once people understand these solutions and they work, and we're seeing a lot more of it.
Yeah.
So it's being
brought more into the mainstream, more accepted.
That's right, exactly. The question is why don't you have solar on your roof? Why isn't your home more efficient? Putting new windows in. A high efficiency air conditioner can cut your your electricity bill by a third. So these are just really accessible solutions, and it's just a matter of making that happen. And when you understand that the cost of inaction is greater than the cost of action, then we can move, as a society. And the last 3 years with the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the incentives and changing our tax code to allow, a pay down for solar, because usually the problem is the upfront cost with everything.
With
right?
everything, that's usually the biggest hurdle you have to go through. Everything else afterwards is less intense in comparison.
But that's what the utilities do. What do? They build a power plant, they stick it on your bill, and you pay for it. They're financing it, right?
Yeah.
So if we can do the same with the energy, make our home more efficient, might be a new roof, new air conditioner, get better windows, get that envelope, that's going to make you more resilient, and invest in solar.
Yeah.
And that's going to pay off, and then you're going to have free electricity.
Yes. So you've mentioned a lot of new clean energy solutions, and that's all very important. Can you also talk about where else are we still lagging when it comes to clean energy solutions and how to get there?
Well, I mentioned aviation and shipping, right? So there's a lot of fossil fuels involved in aviation, but there are efforts to do that. I know that, there's a Ethiopian mustard seed at the University of Florida. They've been looking at carinata, so creating an aviation fuel, and they've been working with a Canadian partner to develop that technology.
I haven't heard about that at all. That's interesting.
So they've done that. Richard Branson with Virgin Airlines has done a lot of work on clean aviation fuels and also shipping. I mean, you have companies like Amazon. They do an enormous amount of shipping. So, but we can do that too. But there also has to be the volume and the desire to do that, right? You got to have that market. And Florida's the second largest market for electric vehicles. And even a good example also was Germany. 20 years ago, Germany made a commitment to go to 100% renewables. And they were the initiators of really driving the cost down. Because once you do that and you build a market, the volume, it really goes back to the microwave oven story, right? Once you develop it, the first rounds of it are going to be expensive. But as you develop it more, I mean, even look at the price of Teslas, for instance, have gone way down.
Compared to when they were at first.
Yeah,
and I know I was looking at the Hyundai Ioniqs recently as a hybrid car a few years ago. Their new car started at like $20,000, which is like compared to a fully gas powered vehicle. There's some that are in the hundreds of thousands. So the price for those vehicles are going down by a lot, which is amazing.
Yeah. That's exactly
easier for the consumer.
That's right. And you're going to see more and more, just like the solar cost.
Yeah.
Went from being 414% higher than traditional fossil fuels to being 56% less than a cost for fossil fuels.
Absolutely.
So that's what we've seen already, and we're going to see more and more of that.
All right. So we are running out of time at this point, but I did want to ask one more very important question, and something I'm very excited to hear more about. So I hope this provides like some hope for our listeners. But you've mentioned a few times, and I know the CLEO Institute is very on top of working towards climate justice initiatives and clean energy solutions. And we work alongside a lot of different partners and a lot of different organizations. But I wanted you to talk about how the CLEO Institute is poised to lead and bring their playbook to strategic areas around, not even just Florida at this point. We've been based in Florida, but around the country. Can we get some more information on that? And I'm very excited to hear it. I'm putting down my pen.
Yeah.
I'm ready.
The CLEO Institute has a unique playbook, and we start with the basis of the need for climate literacy.
Yes.
So we need many, many, many people to understand the basics of climate science and the basics of solutions so they can be their own advocates, right? We need an army of advocates. So we have a climate speakers network. We have Gen CLEO, which is young people. That's right, on 8 college campuses here as well. That's right, and growing all the time. I keep getting a lot of interest myself from wanting to expand that. And then Empowering Resilient Women is another program that CLEO has. So you're training people, you're giving them the understanding, again, climate science, but also financial literacy and what makes a community more resilient. And then you're empowering them to go out and train their own communities and be speakers in their own communities. Same thing with the Climate Speaker Network. So we are growing those programs and packaging them and taking them to strategic markets around the country. So, there's certain areas that are crying for, I hear this all the time, we need CLEO up here, right? We need CLEO in different parts of the state. So CLEO went from being very, Miami-based, and Caroline Lewis founded that, and was training scientists to become better communicators. So
That's
the science
important,
is
yeah.
there, but if we don't know how to talk to people in terms that
They
they
understand.
understand. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then can go out and spread the word, right? So
That seems to be something that's very difficult for a lot of people to understand. Like, climate is this huge thing that not everyone has the capacity or resources or the time to really sit down to understand. So what I've enjoyed about working with CLEO is how easy they make it for you to understand why things are happening, the implications of it happening, and how to best move forward with that information as well.
that's right. And once you understand, then in fact, once you understand, you're kind of like, oh my gosh, how could this be?
How can I help?
Yeah, what can I do? Exactly. So we're putting that together and expanding already, in Florida and looking at, where we need to be in different parts of the country. Because there are a lot of great organizations nationally, regionally, locally, but there's no one doing that.
Yeah.
And training people to become advocates, training people to run for office, training people to educate.
To speak to elected officials.
That's right.
To advocate for policies in their areas, which is all very important and very necessary considering the lack of will in these areas.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and one other thing, becoming an advocate and talking to elected officials is important. But you used the word cocky, that some of the elected officials. Part of that is because in politics there is a process of drawing lines. So every time the census is done, they redraw state legislative districts and they redraw congressional districts. So when you draw it in such a way that you can sort of front load certain voters into a handful of districts, and then the rest of them become very uncompetitive for elections. So there's a lot of kind of trickery.
we love gerrymandering.
Yeah.
We don't really. Just
Yes.
making that clear.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, we have a lot of challenges before us, but we can do it. We have the technologies for the transition, and we have to get past the denial, the disinformation, the doubt and the delay. We used to call what we're seeing the warming, global warming. And there is a well-known Republican pollster, Frank Luntz, who for the congressional Republicans did polling and focus groups and advised them not to call it global warming, but call it climate change, because the climate is always changing. So even in the language that people use, Frank Luntz has regretted doing this and has written and spoken about that, he's feels badly for what he did, but he gave them a communications tool.
Yeah.
And that's why we need the CLEO Institute to give people the right communication tools so they can convey the science and the solutions in a way that resonates with people, that's very understandable, so we can get that political will and move to action.
Absolutely. Well, before we go ahead and finish off, is there anything else that you maybe want to talk about that we haven't touched on, or any last words to give our viewers or listeners for a little extra hope to go about their day?
Well, we can do this thing. We just need everybody at the table. So we need more people to get informed. Please go to the CLEO Institute website and just sign up to get action alerts so you can be part of that, and perhaps join a, Climate Change 101, which is a modified version, or sign up for the whole Climate Speakers Network. That's right. So you got to get informed and you got to get engaged. And if we all do that, we can push this thing, across the finish line and get to the right place, because we have what we need. By and large, we have what we need to transition to a clean energy economy. It's going to mean more jobs. It's going to be a less expensive avenue than what we're dealing with, not only with what we pay for our power, what we pay, how we drive, which is a less expensive opportunity as well, and then to avoid, this extreme weather and all of those costs as well, from the heat to the hurricanes. So really, it's a good news story, and the only thing that's stopping us is a lack of political will. Really, that stems from a relative small group of folks that make money selling fossil fuels, and it's that simple. And we can get past that, but we're going to need everybody at the table to do so. All
right. Well, thank you so much, Susan, for your time, and thank you for coming on the House on Fire podcast. It was a pleasure having you and your 20 years of expertise to make this a bit of an easier topic to discuss.
Great. Well, Danya, it was fun to get to know you too. So look forward to doing it again.
Absolutely. And what an interesting episode, folks. Susan is amazing. I would like to think I know my stuff, but of anyone, Susan definitely knows her stuff. It was a pleasure talking to her about the many ways that we can move forward, and we have the solutions on deck. So keep that in mind. If you ever feel a little less hopeful, we have the resources. We just need to mobilize them. The House on Fire podcast is powered by the CLEO Institute, but could not be made possible without the support of the Lynn and Lewis Wolfson II Family Foundation. Be sure to go on our website, www.cleoinstitute.org, to find out more ways to get involved and learn about our many amazing programs. If you're listening to us on a podcast platform, be sure to give us a 5-star review. It really helps us out and helps other people tune into us so that they can learn more about ways they can help out the climate. If you're watching on YouTube, I haven't forgotten about you. Be sure to follow, subscribe to our CLEO Institute page, and hit that notification bell so that you get notified whenever we drop a new episode. And as always, like and comment, because I'd love to hear what you have to say. I'd like to think that we're a fun podcast to listen to, despite the heavy conversations. We do stuff here. I hope you have a wonderful day. Keep cool in the Florida heat, although right now I'm loving the weather, so I hope you're enjoying the weather. And until next time, stay safe, be cool, and we'll talk to you soon.